Anytime you or I are generous, it has a great impact. It has a great impact now and throughout eternity. In the past, it's interesting, the word generous involved the concept of nobility. But over the last 5 centuries, generosity has developed from the description of elite nobility to being an achieved mark of admirable personal quality and action that's capable by ordinary people like you and me. Ralph Waldo Emerson said this: "Generosity is the opener of doors for those who come after you." It's a cool statement. And a universal definition of generosity is this: it is the habit of giving freely from the heart. That means our time, our skills, our attention, and our material goods. Giving that without expecting reciprocation, acknowledgement, or even gratitude. There's an ancient law. It's called the law of circulation. And actually, it's repeated in the Bible statement that says, "Give, and it shall be given to you." Well, this law of circulation requires that we give others whatever we wish to have for ourselves. So, if we want love, then we must give love. If we want peace, then we must give peace. If we want prosperity, then we must give prosperity to help others gain prosperity. You see, giving generously is a byproduct of the profound strength of character that comes from genuine humility, and it is one of our best reflections of Christ's love for us, the one who generously gave his life for you and for me. And you know what's interesting? Even while we're at home, a knock at the door can provide an opportunity to convey personal generosity and to expand life in unexpected ways. Let me give you an example. I know of a family in Colombia who never locked their doors, even during the worst times of the drug cartel wars in that country. And one evening, the lady of the house, Mrs. Salazar, answered the rapping on the front door of her home, and she found one of her son's former friends standing there. The young man looked disheveled and dirty and distraught, and he asked Mrs. Salazar for some food. She invited him in. She prepared a delicious, nutritious dinner for him, and she sat with him at the table as he gobbled it down. Afterwards, she invited him to take a warm shower and to sleep in the guest bedroom for the night. And in the morning, she gave him some clean clothes that had belonged to her son. The young man thanked her, and he left feeling refreshed and relaxed and genuinely cared for. About a year later, she ran into him waiting in line for a bus to arrive. He was dressed nicely in a suit and a tie, and he was neatly groomed, and he was cleanly shaven, and he looked her straight in the eye, and he said, "Thank you, Mrs. Salazar, for what you did for me that night. You gave me food. You gave me warmth and a shower and a comfortable bed to sleep in for the night and clean clothes. And you also respected me and treated me with kindness without regard to my appearance or my situation. In fact, for a long time, I had been addicted to drugs, and I was crashing at the houses of people I didn't even know. I was just passing out there and feeling so lost and alone. And mostly those people resented me and told me never to bother them again, even though they were still willing to take me in for just one night. But more than anything, what I remember is their frowning faces and their judgment of me as a despicable human being. But you were different. You simply extended your gracious kindness, and you gave me what you had without any feeling of blame or loathing. And as I left your home the following morning, I knew at that moment that I would make definite changes in my life. I mean, the non-judgmental acceptance and kindness of your generosity was like a catalyst for me to turn my life around. So thank you Miss Salazar, from the bottom of my heart. Well, Jesus put this kind of attitude in action this way in Matthew 25:40. He said, and this is such a powerful statement, I tell you, he said, it's the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. And friend, we just don't begin to know how many lives we touch through the acts of generosity that Christ does through our lives. And we don't begin to understand the power of the lives of the people we've shown Christ's kindness to. Because you see, generosity spreads and it transfers. And it has like a pay it forward effect many times over. Well, right here's a good time for us to stop and take what we've heard and discuss some questions about generosity. It's an interesting truth that the attitude of generosity affects all areas of a person's life, not just our bank account. And you can usually tell when a person has a generous spirit. I want to just list for you some of the characteristics that come when generosity is ruling in our lives. First of all, generous people tend to be satisfied people, except for one thing, the amount they give away. They always want to try to be able to even give more. They want to be generous with what they have. They are typically not driven by the desire to just acquire more possessions. I mean, they may have a nice house and they may have a nice car, but those things do not drive a generous person. They would be just as content without them. And secondly, generous people say yes more than they say no. Do they have more money than everyone else? Well, not necessarily. But they usually manage their money and their time and their possessions in such a way that allows them to say yes a lot more times than, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And they almost always prioritize people over each one of their areas of money or time or possessions. Number 3, generous people do not wait for opportunities of generosity to come to them. You find them asking, is there anything I can do for you? And what's interesting is they mean it. It's not just some flippant little statement. They seek ways in which they can bless others. Generous people know that some of the neediest people will never approach them or anyone else for assistance. Therefore, generosity often involves taking the initiative. And the fourth characteristic of a generous person is this: they do not think of themselves as owners. And because of that, they don't talk about their possessions. They know that any possessions they hold ultimately belong to God. And it is their responsibility and opportunity to manage them well for God's purposes. Generous people's possessions are just tools to be used for generosity. They truly believe God did not design us to be hoarders, but conduits through which His generosity can flow. And there's one more I'll mention. In generous people, there's a sense of levity and energy. I mean, their lack of attachment to possessions develops lightheartedness in them. They're not burdened by the drive to get and keep more stuff. They're not concerned about what others have that they do not have, and they kind of live life open-handedly. You see, generous people experience a freedom and an adventure that people who are not generous seldom ever experience. So when we align ourselves with a posture of generosity, it becomes obvious. We are easily identifiable because our generosity has infected our entire being and our entire life, and it is having great impact in the lives of others. So why don't you take what we've heard and already talked about today and discuss it? But just before we do, I want to read you Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. This is kind of the motto for Simple Church, and I hope it's the motto for our lives. Those people who called themselves Christians, those New Testament believers, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. Now here's what's cool. All the believers were together, and they didn't think about their possessions. They held everything in common. And they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And because of that, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, and they broke bread in their homes, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. You see, the resurrection of Christ, the power of this living Christ in us, had a direct impact on how these first Christians viewed their stuff. And I pray that it will have an impact on us also. Enjoy your discussion.